In the realm of literature, certain works of philosophy, drama, and history have stood the test of time and are rightly described as the great books. These writings have captivated and influenced numerous philosophers, teachers, and students. One genre of the great books that draws particular interest is the ancient epics and dramas such as the Iliad, Odyssey, and the three Theban plays. When considering how to educate those students, Christians often ask, is it wise for Christian students to study the ancient epics and dramas? Some would argue that reading these works is improper for Christian students and of much detriment to their education. After all, this literature was written by pagans who believed in false gods. In the Republic, the philosopher Socrates insists on careful regulation of subject matter. He asserts that the youth should never be exposed to ideals contrary to proper values. However, despite Socrates' arguments, the study of these writings strengthens the powers of the mind, and their stories can also encourage students to embrace biblical truths. Furthermore, when students are confronted with ideals contrary to their beliefs, the exercise of analyzing these views strengthens each reader's own convictions. Then, with his convictions fortified, the student is better prepared to face the hostile assaults of the world. An examination of these 4 points demonstrates that Christian students will indeed benefit from a study of ancient epics and dramas. One of the most obvious, yet still compelling reasons to read the ancient works is that students can significantly increase their mental powers. By reading and working through difficult material, students exercise their minds like a muscle. As the student plumbs the depths of a Greek hero's character and works through challenging questions about justice and truth, he trained his mind just as a muscle is worked. Sometimes, his mind becomes rather sore, but it eventually grows markedly stronger. Aeschylus' play The Eumenides presents an interesting example of this point by challenging the reader to answer difficult questions about how humans can establish a system of justice. The main character, Orestes, is the son of Agamemnon, a Greek general who was killed by his wife, Clytemnestra. To avenge his father's death, Orestes killed his mother, Clytemnestra, and her adulterous lover, Aegisthus. For committing these murders, Orestes is continually pursued by the Furies, female goddesses of vengeance. In desperation, he flees from his tormentors to Apollo's temple in Delphi. After the god puts the Furies to sleep, Orestes escapes to Athena's temple in Athens and pleads for her help. Unfortunately for Orestes, Clytemnestra's ghost awakens, and the Furies begin to torment him once again. However, Athena listens to Orestes and assembles a court of jurors to consider his case. During the trial, the Furies claim that, since Orestes murdered his mother, a blood relative, he should be punished for his outrage. To them, Orestes' guilt is quite clear, regardless of the reasons for his act. Conversely, Orestes argues that his actions were just, that he had to avenge his father's death. As Orestes claims, my black-hearted mother cut him down, enveloped him in her handsome net, but I came back, my years of exile weathered, killed the one who bore me. I won't deny it, killed her in revenge. Apollo, Orestes' protector, even claims that Orestes was not related in blood to his mother. After these arguments, the jurors cast their vote and a count reveals that they are equally divided, half for the Furies, half for Orestes. Athena then votes to acquit Orestes, eliciting joyful expressions of gratitude from the exonerated man. However, the Furies cry out, you younger gods, you have written down the ancient laws, wrenched them from our grasp. We, the daughters of the night, are power stripped, cast down. To placate the enraged goddesses, Athena promises that she makes them the protectors of Athens, and the Furies eventually agree to Athena's generous offer. However, although Athena's proposal was magnanimous, one might ask, was her offer just a maneuver to persuade the Furies to leave Orestes alone? Did Athena act with impartiality? More generally, does the jury system truly administer justitia omnibus? When a mother killer remains unpunished, does that nullify the effectiveness of juries? These are a few of the many difficult questions presented to a student who studies the humanities. At first, they may appear impossible to tackle. However, through contemplation on his own and discussion with other students, the young scholar can gain insights and a much deeper understanding of the play than before. Furthermore, the student will better understand how to approach challenging material and think through it carefully. As a result, his mental powers will be strengthened and his understanding broadened. Through a study of the humanities and similar ancient works, a student can substantially strengthen his mind. In addition to increasing mental powers, the ancient epics and dramas sometimes encourage the reader toward positive moral actions. In particular, these genres present ideas in a very poignant manner. Poems and stories often remain strongly imprinted in the human mind. As Rudyard Kipling said, if history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. For the Christian student, when he reads a doctrinal truth in the Bible, that principle on its own ought to remain firmly fixed in his mind. Yet, if a young scholar studies another work, such as an epic poem or drama that conveys the same message, the ideal can be further cemented in his memory. The authority of the Bible's truth is not supplanted, but rather reinforced. The moral influence of the ancient works is better understood by comparing Solomon's advice about marriage in Proverbs and Odysseus' example in the Odyssey. As Solomon counsels his son, he tells him to drink water from your own cistern and rejoice in the wife of your youth. He warns his son to flee from temptations to be unfaithful to his wife. Solomon firmly sets down a principle for his son and all Christians to remember and follow. Interestingly enough, in Homer's Odyssey, readers are also encouraged towards marital fidelity. After a 10-year war against the Trojans, the Greek hero Odysseus sets out on his homeward journey. Unfortunately for Odysseus, he is beset by numerous obstacles and challenges during his voyage. He has to rescue his men from the land of the Lotus Eaters and fight against the Cyclops. When the warrior is very close to home, his men open a bag of winds that King Aeolus gave to Odysseus. And the bag releases a multitude of gales, which combine to blow Odysseus and his men far away from their homeland. However, Odysseus does not give up on the journey. He presses on, encountering Scylla and Charybdis, surviving a storm that kills the rest of his men, and enduring desperate homesickness on Calypso's island. All these events combine to keep Odysseus away from his home for a full 20 years. However, Odysseus does not forget his family, particularly his wife. The beautiful nymph Calypso tells Odysseus that she will make him immortal if he promises to stay with her. Odysseus replies that, "My quiet Penelope, how well I know, would seem a shade before your majesty. Yet it is true, each day I long for home, long for the sight of home." Despite Calypso's enchanting enticements, Odysseus remains focused on returning to his family and wife. Furthermore, when the warrior eventually arrives in Ithaca, he dresses as a beggar so that he can visit his house unrecognized and determine a plan to ambush his wife's many suitors. Before Odysseus' attack on the suitors, Penelope questions him about his background and asks if he has heard any news of Odysseus. During one of their conversations, the disguised Odysseus constantly reminds Penelope that she is still the wife of Odysseus. Twice he addresses her as honorable wife of Odysseus Laertides, and 2 more times uses similar words to speak to her. Odysseus does not let her forget that she is his, Odysseus' wife. He is jealous for her, not with the wicked jealousy of the suitors, but with the zeal of a devoted husband. Although Odysseus was not a perfect man, much can be learned from his actions toward his wife. As they study the Odyssey, students feel the strain of Calypso's temptations on Odysseus' loyalty, the hero's unending persistence to return home, and the joy of the faithful couple's reunion. Through Odysseus' example of faithfulness to Penelope, the importance of fidelity in marriage is more strongly instilled in the reader's mind. Thus, both Solomon's advice and the Odyssey bear testimony to the value of marital fidelity. In addition to encouraging one's moral actions, a story can also serve as a warning to those who heed its admonition. The issue of pride and its devastating effects is often portrayed in ancient epics and dramas. The Bible discusses this very issue in Proverbs, saying, "The Lord detests all the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished." And again in 1 John, warning that, "For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, and the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world." Clearly, God hates human pride and will not allow it to survive. Christian students should take this instruction to heart and apply it constantly in their lives. Furthermore, if they study the ancient drama Oedipus the King, with its horrific tales of pride and its downfall, this lesson is more strongly implanted in their minds. In the opening scene, a group of suppliant priests approach Oedipus' altar, begging the gods to remove a plague that has overrun Thebes. Oedipus finds them and exclaims, "Oh, my children, the new blood of ancient Thebes, why are you here, huddling at my altar, praying before me? Here I am myself. You all know me. The world knows my fame. I am Oedipus." After this haughty declaration, Oedipus claims that, "I would be blind to misery not to pity my people kneeling at my feet," as if the altar is for him, not the gods. However, as the play progresses, Oedipus discovers that he has murdered his father and married his mother. Contrary to his expectations, he is the cause of the plague that has come upon the city. In anguish, Oedipus takes the gold pins off his mother's robes and drives them over and over into his eyes. Oedipus then loses his kingship and is banished from the city. He cries, "What grief can crown this grief? It's mine alone, my destiny. I am Oedipus." When Oedipus first utters this boastful phrase, it is with immense pride and conceit. However, at the end of the play, he speaks as a previously arrogant man who has been completely humiliated. In this drama, Sophocles presents a prideful man and his downfall, serving as a warning against hubris. Students who study this play will be influenced more strongly to beware of pride and its disastrous consequences. Not only can ancient epics and dramas reinforce truths in the Bible, but they can also present characters whose actions contradict a student's beliefs. Some might argue that these great books are therefore too dangerous to the student and must be avoided. And, in fact, if these characters are treated without discernment, they can have negative effects on the student's mind. However, when a young scholar examines these characters' actions with careful analysis, their poor examples can, in fact, strengthen the student's beliefs. An interesting example of this fortifying effect occurs as a student studies the Iliad and encounters poor role models who focus on pursuing selfish desires. Personal gains are valued very highly, and having any of them taken away is considered very shameful. In the first book of the Iliad, Agamemnon and Achilles entered into a fierce war argument over war prizes. During a recent raid on a city near Troy, Agamemnon has captured the young lady Chryseis, and Achilles sees another named Briseis. Chryseis' father causes a plague to attack the Greek army, and a seer, backed by Achilles, tells Agamemnon to give up his girl. The king is very angry about having to relinquish his war prize, but eventually does return her to his father. However, still seething over his loss, Agamemnon commands that Briseis, Achilles' prize, be brought to him. Achilles angrily hands her over and cries out, "Atreus' son Agamemnon, for all his far-flung kingdoms, the man disgraces me, seizes and keeps my prize, tears her away himself." Achilles feels shamed at the loss of Briseis, and he even withholds his myrmidons from battle in order to retaliate. Because Achilles does not allow his men to enter the battle, the Trojans slaughter many of the Greeks and almost succeed in destroying their ships. Eventually, Achilles' closest friend, Patroclus, cannot tolerate such outrage and persuades Achilles to allow him to lead the Myrmidons into battle. But alas, Patroclus is killed on the field of battle, and Achilles has lost his dearest friend. Clearly, Achilles is a poor role model, and some people would condemn the study of his actions. However, despite Achilles' improper actions, students can still learn much from him. Students can ask themselves, why was Achilles' attitude wrong? What encouraged Achilles to hold on to his anger? What were the consequences of Achilles' actions, and how do they reflect on his choices? In fact, if students carefully study the Iliad, they will realize how Achilles' decisions injured him and the other Greeks terribly. Thus, when students encounter poor role models, they can learn from these characters and in the end strengthen their own beliefs. Conversely, in the Republic, Socrates discusses temptations from poor role models and censors any material containing these supposedly detrimental influences. Socrates and his fellow philosophers are constructing an ideal republic for themselves, and they begin to converse about how to train the republic's future rulers when they are still young. Socrates' goal is to raise rulers who will be temperate, not given to any extremes in one way or another. The philosopher first argues that young leaders must have courage. He says that, since fear of death is destructive to bravery, the rulers should not be exposed to verses such as Achilles' words in the underworld, "I would rather be a serf on the land of a poor and portionless man than rule over all the dead who have come to naught." In addition, Socrates argues that the rulers should not hear descriptions of the features of the underworld, the rivers Coctus and Styx, the ghosts, and other horrors. These stories might cause the nerves of our guardians, that is, the young rulers, to be rendered too excitable and effeminate by them. The philosophers also determined that the young leaders should not read stories about the lamentation of great men and gods, since rulers should bear with the greatest equanimity any misfortune. Thus, Socrates claims that the youth should never hear of Priam's actions when Hector was killed, trying to convince the other Trojans to let him out the gate, rolling in the dirt, calling each man loudly by his name. To further protect the youth, Socrates recommends that the young rulers should not laugh, for a fit of laughter, which has been indulged to excess, always produces a most violent reaction. Consequently, Socrates and his associates decide that the youth should not be exposed to any passages discussing the laughter of the gods. Through these various restrictions on the young rulers' readings, Socrates isolates them from any harmful literary influences. He allows them only to read what will encourage them towards temperance. Some would argue that Socrates' plan is of much benefit to the youth, since they will be protected from corrupting influences. However, the young leaders will not experience the benefit of evaluating actions with which they do not agree. Thus, although isolation may seem beneficial, analyzing poor examples in ancient epics and dramas ultimately is a valuable exercise. One of the most compelling reasons for Christian students to read ancient epics and dramas is that doing so prepares them to confront attacks from the world. If Christian students are completely isolated and then finally exposed to the world, they can easily be shocked and even brainwashed. Conversely, if students have worked through ideals that are contrary to their own beliefs, they will be more prepared to analyze and counteract erroneous views they encounter in the world. A case in point is the supreme rule of the pagan gods as presented in the ancient epics and dramas. Throughout these works, the reader is confronted with a world in which multiple pagan gods wield power over the lives of men. In the Iliad, after Agamemnon returns the captive Chryseis, he is visited by a dream sent from Zeus that urges him to attack Troy immediately. The king believes the dream and takes counsel with his leading captains. With Nestor's advice, they decide to attack Troy and begin preparing for the battle. However, the Greeks do not assault the city immediately, but instead offer sacrifices to Zeus first. Agamemnon begs the king of the gods, "Zeus, Zeus, god of greatness, don't let the sun go down or the night descend on us, not till I hurl the smoke-black walls of Priam headlong, torch his gates to blazing rubble." Another example of belief in the sovereignty of the Greek gods arises in the drama Oedipus Rex, where Oedipus is harrowed by an inescapable fate from the gods. But when but a young baby, Oedipus is fated to marry his mother and murder his father. Later in life, Oedipus learns of this prophecy at Delphi and tries to avoid its fulfillment at all costs. He appears to be successful and is even made king of Thebes. However, during his reign, Oedipus discovers that his fate has come true. In anguish, Oedipus cries, "Apollo, friends, Apollo, he ordained my agonies, these my pains on pains." And he calls himself, this great murderous ruin, this man cursed to heaven, the man, the deathless gods hate most of all. Despite his desperate efforts, Oedipus cannot escape from his fate determined by the gods. The gods instead rule supreme over the course of his life. In these two stories and many others, the student is presented with a world ruled completely by pagan gods. Although Christian students do not agree with this belief, they can benefit from analyzing its ideology. They can ask questions such as, what brought the Greeks to believe in such gods? How are these gods a perversion of the one true God? What are negative consequences the Greeks experienced from following these gods? Through such questions, students can understand the problems with the Greeks' beliefs and can sharpen their minds to analyze ideas with which they disagree. A quote attributed to Aristotle shares a similar sentiment. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. In other words, a strong mind is capable of examining an idea without automatically believing it to be true. This type of exercise prepares Christian students to counteract ideals with which they do not agree. The character Antigone is an interesting example of an individual grounded in her convictions and prepared to face hostile opposition. Antigone's brother Polynices attacks his native city, Thebes, and his forces are defeated. In anger against Polynices' rebellion, Creon, king of Thebes, orders that Polynices should not be buried, his corpse a carrion for the birds and dogs to tear, an obscenity for the citizens to behold. However, Antigone vigorously disagrees with Creon and buries her brother. When Creon finds out, she tells him that it wasn't Zeus, not unleashed, who made this proclamation, that is Creon's law, not to me, nor did that justice, dwelling with the gods beneath the earth, ordain such laws for men. Antigone understands Creon's law and disobeys it because she knows that the decree goes against the god's statutes. She does not back down in the face of Creon's threats. Antigone has both strong convictions and the ability to examine and reject ideals with which she does not agree. Much like Antigone, well-read Christian students who are grounded in their convictions and are prepared to analyze hostile ideals can respond strongly when the world confronts them. They are enabled to face the ideals set against them instead of capitulating to flawed viewpoints. In conclusion, a study of the ancient epics and dramas can, in fact, be a very beneficial component of Christian education. Examining difficult material strengthens a student's mind, similar to exercising a muscle. As a student works through challenging questions, he increases his ability to study and analyze complex material. In addition, the power of stories can encourage a student toward positive moral actions. The characters' examples encourage readers toward honorable actions, while their mistakes serve as warning. Although Socrates argues that, for example, should be banned from education, students can still benefit significantly when confronted with influences contrary to their own beliefs. Through careful analysis of ideals with which they do not agree, young scholars will better understand their erroneous views, strengthen their own beliefs, and increase their ability to examine faulty ideals. As a result, students will be better prepared to analyze and counteract hostile arguments that confront them in the world. Thus, Christian students will indeed benefit significantly from a study of ancient epics and dramas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charonnat. You do make a number of arguments for why students benefit from the study of ancient pagan literature. However, given the dangers of pagan literature and the possibility of it leading away from Christ and biblical truth, why would it not be preferable, rather than reading the pagan literature itself, to make Christianized versions of these texts that would be free of the potential difficulties in reading pagan texts? So why not have a remade version of the Iliad, or a remade version of Aeschylus's Oresteia, wherein at the end of the play we don't find simply the proposal of a jury system as a solution to justice, but a full or Christian concept of justice through the absolutes known in Christ would be the consummation of this. And you could simply keep the entire rest of the play, however, At the end, we could have the introduction of perhaps a Hebrew prophet that wandered into the ancient Greek situation and proclaimed the fullness of the Lord's understanding.
Well, I think that it's important for students of the great books to not only read books in which Christian ideals are encouraged, but also books where they are not necessarily encouraged and in which there is the danger that you're referring to. Because when in the world we are going to confront books and writings and lectures that will not encourage us toward Christ. And so I think it's important that we have experience in analyzing those lectures and writings and being able to understand them and understand what's wrong with them.
All right, thank you very much. If the goal is to present the student with literature and ideas that are deficient in some fact in order for them to gain the practice of discerning what is good from what is less than that, why not just present them Christian literature? I think within the wider scope of Christian literature, there's much that we can find that is full of nonsense and fluff, and present to them deficient Christian literature and allow them to examine that in order to develop the powers of discernment.
I think when we look at Christian literature, it still involves God, the one true God, being in the picture. Whereas when we look at a lot of pagan works, God is not in the picture, and it has more power to, it has more negative influence possible, and I think that challenges students more. Now, I think that it's important that students have a strong foundation in Christ, and before they engage these writings, and that maybe even for their first few readings, read something that does involve Christ, or does involve something supporting Christian morality, and gain experience before they go on to reading more difficult writings.
Throughout the scriptures, we are very oftentimes exhorted to avoid the world and to seek God. And couldn't you describe these authors as being precisely the world? And that, though I'm not quoting a specific Bible scripture for you, it seems like there is plenty of exhortation in the scriptures not to be thinking upon the world. And aren't these authors simply the world?
I would say that the authors who are going against God, yes, they are part of the world. But the Bible doesn't just say to isolate ourselves from the world and not engage the world. The Bible tells us to live in the world but not be of the world.
All right. You seem to have articulated in your paper the necessity of looking at these authors to develop discernment and learning to reject their ideas. How far do you believe that Christian students can read these authors to actually learn something of a positive nature? The Apostle Paul quotes a Greek pagan poet and he says all Cretans are liars, and obviously Paul learned something about the character of Cretans from reading one of these pagan philosophers. Do you think there's similarity, positive content that can be derived from reading these pagan authors?
Yes, I think the students can learn positive content. In discussing Nietzsche this year, we went over some points that actually were valid that Nietzsche made. And so we didn't just discard the whole book. So yes, I think that students can gain positive insights from Nietzsche.
And throughout your paper, you did on a number of points demonstrate that by giving various moral beliefs that you derive from various pieces of literature, such as Homer's Odyssey, seeing the difficulty of human passions and not wanting to give in to those. However, most of the examples that you gave were of a sort of moralistic nature. Don't do this, don't do that. And if you want to look at pagan literature in order to derive moralism from it, doesn't that lead right with Plato to man's salvation coming through his works? And so even in the examples that you give, if you go to pagan literature and you learn moralism from them, isn't the temptation to look to ourselves for a moral salvation before God as Plato puts forward?
Would you willing to repeat the question?
No.
No.
Oh, sorry. In the examples that you gave, most of the examples that you gave were of a moral nature. All right? Learning various morals, lessons, life lessons that you can learn by looking at the pagan literature. Always make sure your wife is faithful before you get in the bathtub. That's sort of good education you can get. And so my question to you was, if what you're getting from this pagan literature is morals, isn't that going to give the temptation to simply believe that our salvation comes by doing good things, by being good people? We will live a successful life and be accepted by God, which is exactly contrary to the gospel of Christ, which is that we are saved through Him and not our moral action.
I would say that a lot of these works are focused on self and focused inward. So yes, we can, if we follow these works, we can, some of them, we can get focused on ourselves and gaining our own salvation by our own works, if we do not keep in mind the truths of Christianity as we read it.
Thank you very much. All right. Other questions?
Hey, so I liked your paper. It's awesome. I think that my question is, do you think that Christians, we should watch like rated R movies that has bad content in it, something that could be similar to what you might read in Canterbury Tales, or some GBT books that are not necessarily wholesome for your Christian soul? So do you think we should watch movies that has similar content to the books that we read?
I think that the importance of exposing oneself to the world comes more in the realm of morals and philosophy. And yes, I think that we should know what's going on in the world, and we need to know what the opposite sides are thinking. But I think also that it's important that we, in the case of movies, I think we need to guard our eyes, and we need to be careful what we watch and what we expose ourselves to.
So you would say that it's okay if you don't look at something or watch something bad, but it's fine if you read it, like in a book, in GBT.
I would say that we have more control over our thoughts that we are thinking when we are reading a book. We can analyze it. We can, okay, do I agree with this? Is this philosophy right? But when we're watching a movie, it's being put right there in front of us, and it's coming into our minds through our eyes. And so I think in that way it's more dangerous.
Okay, I think that's a good answer. I have one more question. If so, in terms of preparing Christians and young students for facing the world, do you think that the Bible is insufficient in teaching us what is right and wrong, and that we need great books and these books to help the Bible out? Because it's not good enough to just, study the Bible, go to church, memorize the Bible. Or do you think that you would be totally fine if you spent those hours reading GBT, reading the Bible, and you knew the counterfeit from the real, true philosophies and theology? What do you think about that?
I think the Bible is sufficient to teach us morality. It is completely able to do that. I think that the importance of reading the great books in one way is that we can have our morals that we learned in the Bible be reinforced. The Bible is sufficient to teach us the morals, but they can be further reinforced in our minds. And then if we're confronted with something we don't agree with, that can challenge us to analyze what we don't agree with and see why it doesn't line up with the Bible.
Thank you.
Okay, so you said in your paper that the Christian sort of needs to be exposed to the world in a certain way in order to be prepared to keep on worldly trains of thought. But for instance, I went to the Greek trip a few years ago, and there are Greek Orthodox monks that spend 30, 40 years in complete isolation, and going through the Bible very thoroughly, worshiping and praying almost 24/7. So wouldn't you say that seeking that sort of lifestyle of sort of solidifying your foundations in Christian morals, wouldn't you say that that would also work when exposing yourself to like worldly morals? Like if you have that strong foundation, if you work over it for like 30, 40 years, wouldn't you say that you would be able to take on worldly thought without being exposed to it over like a certain amount of time?
I think that those monks definitely have a very strong foundation in what they're studying, but so that's a difficult question. I don't know how strong they would be when they go out of their monastery and if they face ideas they don't agree with. I think that when humans face ideas that go against them, that can be a strengthening process for them. And so it's good that the monks are studying the Bible and gaining expertise and understanding of it. But I think it's important that not only they do that, but that they be a witness to the world. So they're not just isolated by themselves, but they're actually confronting what's going on.
I liked your paper, and I also like the answer Jordan because I want to bring up something she said in here. She said, it is good to flee from temptation, but one must not starve oneself to avoid the risk of poison. And we brought up the point of, is it bad, since we're reading Canadian authors, is it equally cautionary to watch pagan or inappropriate movies? And I think perhaps, we do the great books, we don't do the great movies because movies are presented in a way that people have had a certain people that produce them have a certain idea and a message that they want to send across. And they can do that not only with the words, with delivery and acting and music and stuff. So, but anyway, back to the great books. You said earlier, you answered the question by Mr. H, that someone should have, before you start studying books by not necessarily Christian authors or to have content that is not morally Christian, before they should have a good base in the Bible. Now, we start GBT off immediately with the Iliad.
Right.
And the Iliad is not by a Christian author. And it includes a lot of very non-Christian action, as I'm sure we all know. So, but it's considered, as you told your paper, it's called A Value of Greek Epics and Dramas in the Christian Education. So, I guess the question is, why would it be an epic if it's not, like Jordan talked about in her paper, the artist or the author would have inspiration of beauty that was eternal and heavenly. But these authors are not Christian, they're pagan, but we still consider some of their works to be great books, and we still want to study a lot of what they have to say. But how can, should we put as much stock in what they say, or why do we call it epic if they're not inspired?
Okay. I think epic is just a category for the Iliad and the Odyssey and those works, epic poems. And I think that we should put more stock in the Bible and definitely study it seriously and have foundations on it before we start studying the great books. And I think that after we have a strong foundation, then we should start studying books like the Iliad, the Odyssey, that are not quite like Nietzsche and those sorts of guys that are completely rejecting God. They still have some connection to Christianity. I think C.S. Lewis in one of our readings said that pagans are sort of pre-Christian compared to atheists because they have a belief in God, in some sort of God already. So I think we should have a foundation in the Bible, and then we should definitely invest time in works like the Iliad and Odyssey before going on to more difficult ones. Does that answer your question?
Oh,
Yeah.
Your paper was delightful, but I was just wondering, you talk about sort of the same thing as in these questions, but you talk about how bad things can have a good influence on us because we see the cautionary tale, et cetera, et cetera. And I was wondering, we talk about the Iliad a lot, and there's a lot of sort of sometimes objectionable content in that. But there's a particular chapter in 14 that we're supposed to skip.
Right.
And Mr. draws a line and says that we should read that chapter. And I was just wondering, should he put that back on the reading list? If bad things can teach us, good lessons, should that be put back on because there's something in there that will teach us something meaningful that we should know? We read some other things that aren't quite above board. So just wondering where do we draw the line? This bad thing will teach you something, but that bad thing, not so much.
I think at that point in GBT, we're GBT 1, so we're just getting into the great books. This is our first book, and I think we're not quite ready to tackle those sorts of sections. I think that's why it's taken out. And then later on, when we are more able to tackle stuff like that, we read the Canterbury Tales. I mean, the Canterbury Tales is like a bunch of those stories. So I'd say at first, that stuff is not wise. But then as the student grows more mature, then
Okay, so sort of following the logic of your paper along the idea that you kind of need a Christian worldview to view these books in the right light and draw virtues from it, how much of a Christian bias is necessary to gain insight from these books?
I mean, can you clarify how?
Yeah, so how much of Christ basically should you just view the scripture or view these great books with? How much of the Bible scriptures should you intertwine and mesh while you're thinking it through?
Well, I think students need to have Christ at their core when they analyze the great books, and they need to definitely be comparing what they read to verses in the Bible, and definitely should be constantly keeping God's word in their mind as they're thinking about the passages.
Okay, so follow-up, then is the only reason why the books are good is because we have a Christian worldview, or can they not possibly be beneficial without that worldview?
I think if someone wasn't a Christian and they did read some of the great books and were morally on track, although they don't believe in Christ, they have good morals. I think that if they are reading some of the great books, maybe not the more ungodly ones, but some of the other ones, I think they can gain insight, but I think it won't be as profound because they don't have Christ there, and they can be more easily led away into the erroneous view.
Okay, so then last question, would you say that only Christians would be recommended to read those books since they would draw the most out of it, and they would make sure to read it, go the right way with the right worldview?
I would say that non-Christians can still benefit from them, and that they should read them. I think that works more like the Iliad and the Odyssey can be of more benefit to them. I think works such as Freud would probably not be very helpful. Can I answer your question?
Yeah.
Great.
Mr. Charonnat, your quote number 21, you give as being an Aristotle quote. However, you reference the website Brainy Quote. However, on further research, one finds that the quote, "It is a mark of an educated man to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it," is an Aristotelian discombobulation. A quote that reflects vaguely Aristotle's notion, but not actually Aristotle. In order to keep yourself from being seen forevermore as a bad example to great books one students who might think that that's a good example to follow, can I present to you the section from Aristotle that comes most closely to that sentiment, and you can perhaps explain how this quote applies to the particular situation you have. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Book 1, section 1094, B24, Aristotle says, "It is the mark of an educated man to look for precision in each class of things just as far as the nature of the subject admits. It is evidently equally foolish to accept probable reasoning from a mathematician and to demand from a rhetorician scientific proofs."
Well, first of all, I'd say that that quote was attributed to Aristotle. Aristotle did not actually write that quote, yes. But
And you are
it's been
correct
attributed.
to actually give it as attributed to Aristotle. However, those who would attribute it to Aristotle would be making a mistake. So would you like to hear the quote from which that quote is derived once again?
Yes.
All right. "It is a mark of an educated man to look for precision in each class of things just so far as the nature of the subject admits. It is evidently equally foolish to accept probable reasoning from a mathematician and to demand from a rhetorician scientific proofs."
I think in the first part, could you read the first part?
It is the mark of an educated man to look for precision in each class of things, just so far as the nature of the subject admits. It is evidently equally foolish to accept probable reasoning from a mathematician and to demand from a rhetorician scientific proofs.
I think in the first part he means that philosophers should not expect more meticulous care in a subject than that subject can reasonably admit of. And I think he's expounding on that in the second part, where he says, you can't expect a rhetorician to speak like a mathematician.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charonnat.
So,
So I hear a lot of people justify reading things, watching movies, reading books, listening to music, because they can sit and think about what was wrong with the song or the book or the movie and reflect upon that to see what does God say about it. But could one not say that that's an excuse to be able to be in the world, to be tainted by the world by allowing yourself to be exposed to these things? Could you say, well, that's, could somebody argue with you, I guess, is that you're exposing yourself to the Canterbury Tales and to, pagan gods, when we should be very careful about how much we let into our minds and into us. That's not just making excuses for wanting to read things that are popular or watch things that are popular.
I think it depends on the person's attitude, the way in which they're approaching what they're viewing. If they are indeed viewing what they're watching with an attitude of, I'm going to look at this, I'm going to see if it lines up with God's truths, then I wouldn't say it's an excuse. But someone who wants to watch this stuff just because they want to see it, because it's popular, because everybody else is seeing it, they could offer the excuse of, I'm exposing myself to the world, so I can know what's going on, when they really just want to watch it for their own enjoyment.
So you think it's about like the heart of the person and not
I think it
the
depends on
content.
how they're approaching it, their attitude. Go ahead, John.
That was a lovely paper. I'm all for moral examples, especially in Greek literature. I am curious, though, about places where your moral literature conflicts with the scriptures. For example, you mentioned fidelity in marriage from Odysseus, and yet you have Abraham and you have David from the Bible and most of the Old Testament who don't necessarily abide by that. And what worked for Odysseus and what, works differently for all of these Old Testament heroes. They're conflicting. If we're holding the Bible as a higher standard, how can we justify that?
So how can we justify the Bible as a higher standard when it's conflicting? Like you're saying?
Well, when you draw the higher moral conclusion from pagan literature and the lower moral conclusion from the scripture, from the standard that we hold highest, what is that dichotomy? What's going on?
Well, I would say with the case of David and the other men who were not faithful, that we are told what they did, and as we read the Bible, if we're reading it carefully, we will see the negative consequences of their actions. I think when Abraham wasn't faithful and had a son with his slave, that son went off and has started a lot of the Middle East nations that are plaguing Israel. And so we see how that's a huge mistake that Abraham made. And so even though we do see that Abraham and David and other characters were unfaithful, we also, if we carefully look at the story, see the negative consequences of what they did and how it actually was not good.
The question about I think there seems to be an argument for why we do defeat let me bring up, we read, I believe it was in my book, and C.S. Lewis presented the idea of the Bulwarist argument, which was basically the form of arguing when you assume automatically that the other person is wrong, and that's really the argument. Is that when you say we should go into reading books that are like Nietzsche or
Freud?
Yes, Freud. And another arguments who do not, or even contradict Christian model. Or should we go in with, like you said here, the ability to entertain thought but not accept it? Or should we go in saying, I know this is wrong, but we can still think about it, we can argue about it, but it's wrong?
Well, if we know before we analyze the work that the writer's main premise is incorrect, I think we should definitely hold that it is incorrect. However, we shouldn't just say, okay, his main premise is incorrect, I'm not going to listen to anything he says, I have no interest in reading this, or I have no interest in any insights that this writer has. I think that we can still learn from writers, even if their main premise is wrong, we can still see things in the writing that is valuable.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well done. Okay, thank you all very much for your attention this morning. We are now going to go to our lunchtime, and I'm going to assume that the table is ready. Let me just say, in order to eat lunch today, you need to be able to say the Greek alphabet and point to each letter as you say it. So please make sure you have your meal card with you. For your meal card to be, there's a lot of talking going on. For your meal card to be activated, it needs to be signed with your name at the top, first and last name. And today at lunchtime, my Greek 2 students are going to be the testers. So all of my Greek 2 students, you are going to be my minions to test people on their knowledge. So you need to have your tester test you on that knowledge. That includes you, Rachel. And when they give it to you, they will sign it, all right? And at the end of the line, you will show it to me, and I will make sure that it's completed. So, now also today, back at 2 o'clock, we're going to be right back here for our singing practice. And so we're going to leave the chairs just like they are right now, and then we're going to be having our debate. And so you have from now until 2 o'clock for your lunch and however relaxation or play practice that you do. Let me just ask right now real quick. I know Rachel Cochran is doing a play. Benjamin Hendricks is trying to get a play together very quickly. Do we have any other people that are doing plays right now? Any other play people? Okay, well, I would say if you want to get a play together really fast, all right, we can still get some more plays in. So, Chandler, you come to me for a meal card. Now, each day, if you lose your meal card, you can get another one from me at the end of the line. All right, so don't lose that meal card. All right, figure out some way to fold that up. And so today you need to have the alphabet. Tomorrow you need to have all the little circles down. All right, all the little circles have words in them. You need to know the meaning of those words, and I will do some work with you on that later. Maddie.
Is it all like really principles, or is it like?
It's going to be